Well, hello YouTubers, this is Matt Kramer here, and I've had this idea in my head for a while. So this is a new sermon series, sermon for you guys. For those of you who know, most of you probably know this already, I do a lot of piano videos at Grace Bible Church. And for the last, I would say almost 2.5 years. I'm not sure if it's reached its actually second year, but at least, I should say at most 2 years, we've been looking for a pastor. And for the last 3-4 weeks, we've had one of our my good friends in the church, Jason Steele, preach on the book of Jeremiah. With the exception of Mark Bruiser last Sunday, and Jason went to Psalms instead of Jeremiah. But when he was in Jeremiah, the last chapter he left off on was chapter 11 of Jeremiah. So I'm going to move a little bit forward into Jeremiah, and it's going to be all the way to the 29th chapter of Jeremiah. This is a very familiar verse to a lot of people, not just in Grace churches, but in all churches, I'm sure. So Jeremiah 29:11, I'm reading from the New King James Version here. 29. I can quote it for you. I'm just going to read it from 29. I know the plans I have for you, saith the Lord. Saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you hope in the future. New King James is a little different than Old King James. Old King James has a different wording. Let me get my Old King James Bible. I'll be right back. Now, Old King James has this, a little different wording than New King James, and of course NIV has probably different wording as well. 29, here we go. Okay, this is Old King James, or the authorized version of 16:11. For I know the thoughts that I think towards you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you an expected end. So that's a little different. I think hope in the future, and a footnote for that verse, it does say, or future and hope. I think, and I'm going to explain why. I think some translators have it correctly. I want to say some translators say, for I know the thoughts that I think. I don't like the word think in that verse. I believe that in both versions, Old and New King James, have think. I don't think, now correct me if I'm wrong, those of you who are more into Hebrew than I am. But I don't think the word think in verse 11 is correct. I know the thoughts I have for you, I think would be better first. Saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil. I believe there are other versions that have the word prosper. To prosper you, this is how I've heard it being said. For I know the thoughts that I have toward you, saith the Lord, thoughts of plans, not just thoughts. Plans of to prosper you and not to harm you. I've heard that version. I'm not sure what version that is, so forgive me for that. But I want to use the word prosper because I think it actually is a better word. Prosper you, not to harm you, to give you a hope in the future. Now, in the Old King James, it has future and hope. I think hope should always be first, and I'll explain why. First, I want to correct a very well-known prosperity gospel preacher by the name of Creflo Dollar, who has said, and you can search this on YouTube, anywhere you want. He has taken, let's go to 3 John, chapter 1, verse 2. 3 John, verse 2. This is a very familiar verse for anyone who is in the Word of Faith movement, because one of their proponents is Creflo Dollar, and he takes this verse I'm going to read right now out of context. It's 3 John, verse 2. Beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things and be in health, just as your soul prospers. Now, that's one of the reasons why I think prosper in Jeremiah 29:11 works. Not just because John says it, but grammatically and for this message, it works. So, let me read 3 John in Old King James. And I think it's very, very similar. 3 John, verse 2. There's only one chapter in John, so 3 John, number 2. Come on, page. Okay, 3 John 2. Beloved, I wish above all, that's interesting. Footnote there. Verse 2, okay, I'm praying all things. That's what they have in New King James. Yeah, New King James has praying all things. I wish above all things that thou mayest prosper and be in health, even as thy soul prosper. That verse by Creflo Dollar has been taken out of context. It has nothing, absolutely nothing to do with material wealth. Okay, nothing. Let's get that out of your head. Now, plans to prosper you or to plans to, let's go back to Jeremiah 29. I might get the reference wrong. Go back to Jeremiah 29:11. Plans to thoughts of peace and not of evil. Okay. Thoughts of peace. Probably peace, not of evil. Well, good and evil. Peace, or the opposite of peace would be war. I'm not sure what the translators were doing with this particular verse. Well, plans to prosper you, not to harm you. Okay. Now, there's a reason why I'm emphasizing that. Because all throughout the judges and the prophets, major and minor, there have been numerous accounts of the judgment of God on Israel and Judah. Israel and Judah. David's kingdom. And remember when Moses was bringing this back in Exodus. Moses was bringing the people out of Egypt, and they came at a crossroads, so to speak, and the people complained to Moses, said, hey dude, we're in the wilderness, we brought it out here to die, we better go back to Egypt. Well, remember that 400 years before that, Abraham was in a dream. Yeah, Abraham was in a dream. And there were two altars, and God, through some form, God moved in between those two altars and predicted the 400-year slavery in Egypt. Okay? Moses is bringing these guys out. These Israelites are starting to complain. Maybe the Israelites in the days of Isaiah and Jeremiah were also complaining too. Say, dude, all these judgments, they're trying to harm us. And maybe, just maybe, they're trying to blame God. Maybe they're trying to blame God. I don't agree that I hope, I shouldn't say that, I hope they're not trying to blame God, but maybe they are. And maybe they're trying to blame God. Oh, God is harming us. God is bringing this harm. No, He's not. You're harming yourselves. They're harming yourselves by disobeying God, by not following the law. And because of that, as far as Jeremiah goes, because of your continual disobedience to the law, one part of you will be taken by Assyria and the other will be taken by King Nebuchadnezzar. So, where do we go from here? Let's go back to the verse. Well, I know the plans. I think the word plans is better. For I know the plans that I have towards you, says the Lord. Plans to prosper you. This is my version. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope should be first in the future. So, let me ask you this. What is the hope of Israel? Well, thankfully, in the latter part of Jeremiah, which I've not read, let me see. I did finish Jeremiah, I'm sorry. In my own personal reading, I actually finally finished Jeremiah. But Ezekiel, which is the next prophet, he really, really, really talks about the coming Messiah. And I think it's Paul who said, that 2 Timothy, let me see. Christ in you, the hope of glory. I think that's a Timothy verse, or Titus verse. I gotta look at that. Hope. I'm looking at my concordance here under hope. So, what is the hope of Israel? Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ, but unfortunately, it took 500 to 700 years for Jesus to come. Now, why is that? Well, first, Israel had to be, Israel and Judah had to be punished for their continual disobedience. Hope. Second, Daniel, which is after Ezekiel, Daniel predicted 70 years of hostility, of enslavement for Israel. And it wouldn't be until Cyrus, the king of Persia, freed Israel and allowed them to go back to their land and rebuild the temple. And Nehemiah talks about rebuilding the temple in 52 days. So, what is the hope for Israel? Jesus Christ. And I want to find a verse. Christ in you, the hope of glory. I hope in God to hope Christ in you. Colossians 1:27. That's the one. Christ in you, the hope of glory. Yeah, Colossians 1:27, Christ in you, the hope of glory. That is for us today. The hope for Israel was Jesus coming on their first Christmas. Hope for us is Christ in us. Now, what is the future? What's the future? Go to Revelation and you'll talk about it, and you'll explain that future. A future of heaven, which could be very soon for many of us who are still suffering from COVID, or now the long haul syndrome. That's a new name. Long haul, COVID, coronavirus, whatever you want to call it. Future is our death, the death of the Christian and eternity in heaven. Hope. The future also is spoken of in Revelation, which happens to be the rapture of the church, tribulation of Israel, unfortunately, disobedient Israel, non-believing Israel, tribulation for 7 years, the 1,000-year reign of Christ, Battle of Armageddon, the Great White Throne Judgment, and the new heavens and new earth. That's our future. Now, so, what kind of future are you hoping for? What hope do you have today? Do you want to prosper in this life without Christ, or do you want to prosper with Christ? Do you want to stay away from harm? Well, I'm going to tell Israel this, non-believing Israel today. You are surrounded by terrorism. You are surrounded by people who do not believe in the God of the Bible. So, if you do not want to be harmed, I would suggest that you start reading the New Testament. You start reading the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You start reading the books of the Apostle Paul, which apply to us today. And I will also encourage people of Israel to read Revelation, because, and this is common belief, that the people of Israel now are at the Wailing Wall. They're praying for relief. They're praying for a victory. They're praying for someone to come and free them from oppression, whatever it may be, whether it's oppression from Islam, oppression from something else. We don't know. But they're at the Wailing Wall and they're praying for a leader to come and set them free. Well, let me tell you something. First, there are actually going to be two leaders who are going to come, two of them. One, the first leader who's going to come is going to be someone who would say to you, hey, I'm the guy to help you out. I'm the guy to help you out. I hear about this contract that you got. Let's sign it together. Okay, so we signed a contract. It's good for 7 years. That guy's not Jesus. That guy is the son of perdition, or the man of sin, also known as the Antichrist. The second guy who's going to come is Jesus Christ. And Israel today will not believe. I can count on that. Every person, every preacher that I know believes that. Every preacher, okay? Now, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. If some guy comes from Israel and says, oh, we believe in Jesus. Really? Prove it. Prove it. Now, let me go back to the harm part. There's something. It's interesting in my reading of Jeremiah that even though Nebuchadnezzar is Babylon, he's a Gentile. Nebuchadnezzar is called God's servant, or God calls Nebuchadnezzar his servant. It's like God, you hear all these word of faith preachers say, oh, God came to me last night. God said this to me. The Spirit gave me this word. The Spirit said this. Well, imagine if that does happen, and rarely do I believe if at all. Imagine God, say 2,700 years ago. Imagine God going to Babylon himself, which is, I believe is modern day Turkey. Going into Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. Pulls him aside, Hey, Nebuchadnezzar, come here. Shows him a map of Israel. You see that little piece of land right by the Jordan River? You see that land right by the Sea of Galilee? You see that land just off the coast of Africa, off the coast, just a little northeast of Cairo, Egypt. You see that land? That's Israel. That's my people. I want you, and I told this to the Assyrian king too, I want you, Nebuchadnezzar, to go down there, or up there, whatever direction it may be, and I want you to take those people into your kingdom. See what kind of harm really does come to them. They may blame me. This is God speaking. They may blame me. But you know what? In actuality, they should be blaming themselves. Like I said before, they're harming themselves because they refuse to obey the law of God. Now, granted, the law of God is 613 different laws. I understand that. But just take the 10 commandments. Can you follow all the commandments? You can sure try. You can sure try. The reason why Jeremiah wrote this was because God knew that Israel was suffering a little too much. But there was still more to come. I would suggest to you guys, those of you who are listening, read every account of every king of Israel and Judah after Solomon, especially in Jeremiah, and read about what was said, who got the judgment, why they got the judgment, and what came after that. So, 4 plans of God. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans of peace, or as this says, plans of peace, or thoughts of peace and not of evil. Almost the same thing. But for me, I like the word prosper because I'm a Star Trek fan. Live long and prosper. But that's not to say prosper here. Okay, and again, prosper has nothing to do with money. Nothing. Sorry, Creflo Dollar, just so you know. But prosper, not to harm you. Prosper Israel, not to harm Israel. Plans to give Israel a hope, which is Jesus Christ. 500 to 700 years after this, because there's actually, after Malachi, it's reported widely around the world, it's reported that during the days of Alexander the Great and Antiochus Epiphanes IV, there was no divine message from heaven. None. For 400 years. It's a long time. So 400 years, so give or take 500 to 700 years before Jesus was born, God had plans. God had plans back in Genesis 3:15. God had plans when Moses brought Israel out of Egypt. God had plans for Joshua in the Battle of Jericho. God had plans, during the 12 tribes. 12 tribes conquered. God had plans for Israel concerning David after Saul disobeyed God. God had plans for every judge, every prophet, and God knew his plan. And finally, after 500 to 700 years, that plan was fulfilled in Jesus Christ. Now, again, hope for Israel is Jesus Christ then. Hope for us is Jesus Christ today before the rest of the church. Our future is in Him. Our future is in heaven, but it's also our future is in Him even as we live. So, do you know the plan of God for your life? I hope I do from me. That's the message I wanted to give you guys. 4 plans of God based on Jeremiah 29:11. Go to church tomorrow. And if you're in the Anaheim area, I would welcome you to Grace Bible Church Anaheim. We start service at 10:30. But if you want to be there early for adult Bible study, you're more than welcome to come. The address is 2550 West Orange Avenue in Anaheim. Okay, 92804, I believe is the zip code. Grace Bible Church Anaheim, corner of Magnolia and Orange. Grace, we're next to what used to be called St. Paul's Presbyterian Church. We're the church right next to it. So services start at 10:30, but there is an adult Bible study at 9. You're more than welcome to join us. And we plan to have a better open mic night next first Friday of the month, which will be the first Friday of December. I'll give you a prize on that. I hope you enjoyed this message this evening, and I hope you all have a great evening. Goodbye.